All right, up next is Gregory Adams. Let's hear it.
Good evening, everyone. I'm just going to leave that where it is. Hi, I'm Gregory Adams, and I'm very happy to be here this evening. I have a couple of books over here. They're both collections of short stories. One is called One Day in Hell, and the other is called The River Above, and they have charming illustrations. Given the setting, I've got a couple of stories I'm going to read this evening. Three. Two deal with lifeboat cannibalism, and one is suburban horror, because we're in Salem, so that seems appropriate. So our first lifeboat story is called Mr. Bit Adrift, and here we go. "Your time has come, Mr. Pinniped," said the carpenter as he rose to his feet. The small lifeboat shifted beneath his weight, but the carpenter's a thin man, and his mass meant little to the play of the craft when measured against the vessel-tipping bulk of his colleague. Indeed, the entire boat settled awkwardly into the ocean with Mr. Pinniped at the bow, causing the stern to rise from the waves. How many other survivors of the fast-sinking Alice had the tremendous man displaced by his presence? That may never be known, but the carpenter knew exactly how many had disappeared down the formidable hatchway that lurked just beneath the flagrant mustaches. He knew because when the situation became desperate and the killing began, they had shared. But now that the last had gobbled down and the inedible scraps tossed over the side to the delight of the sharks that trailed the boat like murderous ribbons, the time for sharing was past. "Now really, Mr. Pinniped," said at the carpenter's approach, "is this what we have come to? There are rules of the sea, my fellow, and as you are no doubt aware. Do we toss civilization over the side as easily as we did that young woman's pelvis? I should hope not. We carry civilization with us, and we cannot jettison it upon the waves when our fortunes turn sour. We are, after all, British. Let's discuss for a moment and see what—" "No more discussion," the carpenter said. "I have endured your talk on civilization and rule of law and proper conduct and all the rest too long already. I have listened while you explained why we had no choice but to consume members of our own party, why it was logical to begin with the children, and why it was the sailors' duty to go next, even though they alone understood navigation. I listened when you began on the women after that, as they were too weak to row, although you have not touched an oar since we pulled you aboard." "Well, my back," Mr. Pinniped interrupted. "Your back," the carpenter shouted. "I'll hear another word about the infirmities of your body and the strength of your mind, your fantastic, well-educated, indispensable mind, that organ which provided you with the logic and argument that every other person on this boat, from the youngest child to the first mate, should go to ration before you. Well, Mr. Pinniped, it's come down to you and I. I was a carpenter, but I've become your butcher, and since that's the trade I know, you'll forgive me if I practice it upon the only subject at hand." "Surely the sharks will be more palatable than I," came the protest. "Working together, we could catch one." "Fish does not tempt me, Mr. Pinniped," the carpenter said. "I'm hungry for a bit of red meat." With that, he came forward, the long butcher's knife, the only implement they had managed to retain through all the storms, struggles, and debates, clutched tightly in his right hand. Mr. Pinniped's broad, fleshy face fell to disappointment. "I'm saddened to see this," he said, as he drove his mighty bulk against the lifeboat's stern. The carpenter tottered for a moment, his ravenous mask at once dissipating into a look of sheer terror. He might have saved himself if he had dropped to the deck, but with the first pitching roll, his eyes fell to the churning waves, and he looked deeply into the black button eye of a waiting shark. He was instantly enthralled, as the sparrow is by the snake, and as so often the case, his fascination led him, unerringly, to the subject of his fixation. The carpenter went over with a mighty splash, but one that did not end as most splashes will. This one was kept alive by activity beneath the surface of the water. Indeed, it grew more agitated as the seconds ticked by. "You see the reason for civilized behavior," Mr. Pinniped said, addressing himself towards the boots that kicked against the side of the boat above a red boil of seawater. "Civilization protects us, sir. It keeps the strong from bullying the weak and the clever from abusing the foolish." He paused as he saw an opportunity was about to pass him by. Leaning forward, he grabbed the boot that thumped furiously against the lifeboat. Mr. Pinniped gave a strong pull, and although the sharks were numerous and added advantage, their teeth were made for slicing and not for hanging on, and in a few mighty tugs, Mr. Pinniped was rewarded with a not inconsiderable percentage of the former carpenter. Never a selfish man, Mr. Pinniped was certain to share the sharks any part of his dinner he found unpalatable. Also a practical man, he had some idea about perhaps hauling one of the gluttonous fish aboard in defense against future needs. But the specimens he observed were too robust for such an attempt, and besides, that fool of a carpenter had taken their only tool with him when he had chosen anarchy over society. Still, the knife was not much needed. A passing whaling vessel spotted Mr. Pinniped just 2 days after he became the lone survivor of the wreck of the Alice. The whalers, well-developed men used to pulling at great weights, were nevertheless winded with the effort of bringing Mr. Pinniped aboard. "How did you do it?" they asked, when they heard his abridged tale of over 100 days adrift at sea, and he still fat and sleek as a judge. "Good fortune," Mr. Pinniped said, not wishing to boast of his own efforts in achieving his survival. "I had the luck to tumble into a boat filled with provisions." And in saying this, he wasn't really lying at all. This is called the House on Azanthoth Road. It's set in the New England town of Arkham. Philip slipped and landed on his backside. Thick, translucent goo shot up from the soles of his shoes and splashed against the side of his Chrysler Sebring. Phillips was too busy examining his trousers for splits to notice, but the sticky substance hissed and crackled on the door panel and then skittered away, flowing into the seam between the door and the fender like a living thing, leaving long, smoky stains that looked as if they might be permanently etched into the finish. Philip raised his hand. Mucus hung from his fingers as if he just caught a copious sneeze. His overcoat and trousers must be covered in the stuff. Standing, he threw his briefcase on the lawn and kicked at the goo. The trail of slime led, as he knew it would, from a gap in the tall boxwood hedge that separated Philip's unit and the Pleasant Valley condominiums from their nearest neighbors. Something had squeezed through the shrubs, turning the small leaves black and coating the grass in Philip's own driveway in a thick layer of slime. It was almost as if the neighbor's dog had come into the yard, only the dog was some kind of enormous slug. Whatever it was, whatever caused the total destruction of Philip's morning, his neighbors were yet again to blame, and it was the last damn straw. Knowing that he was fulfilling every stereotype of the angry neighbor, but too furious to care, Philip raised his fist and shook it at the looming black shape of the ancient house. "Damn you, Akeley, this is the last damn straw!" The house, a massive pre-colonial structure of indeterminate rooms and uncertain pedigree, did not respond. Philip stormed into the house and called the police. "What do you think might have caused such a thing?" the responding officer asked. It had taken the Miskatonic Valley police nearly 30 minutes to respond to Philip's many calls, and now that they had arrived, there was little enthusiasm to their inquiry. "I don't know," Philip said. "How do I know what that crazy old man is doing over there? The house is dark all day, but he's up all hours of the night, chanting, yelling. We've heard screams," Philip's wife, Veronica, interrupted. The officer's ears seemed to perk up at that. "Yes, screams," Philip said, encouraged by the officer's reaction. "All kinds of gibberish. Yog Soggoth, Milagoth, Narloth Tep. Mygo," Veronica said. "He's always yelling at someone named Mygo." "Yeah, that's right," Philip agreed. "Does he have a Chinese nurse or something?" The officer turned and considered the old Akeley house in silence. Only the steeple-gabled roof and peaks of several towers could be seen jutting over the tall hedge. The gray, weathered structure was a stark contrast to the new homes that had gone up all around it in the area that had once been called Blasted Heath, but was now known as Pleasant Valley Community. "We know he keeps livestock," Philip continued. "Cows, goats, that's got to be against some city statute or other." The officer looked more skeptical than ever. "Cows? We've seen them," Veronica said. "They come in by truck, 2, 3 at a time, maybe twice a month." She thought for a moment. "We never hear them again, though." "We hear the goats enough," Philip said. "Loud as anything all night. You think he's got 1,000 of them up there. Maybe his livestock got listening to this? Do cows lose any kind of slime at all?" The police officer shrugged over his imagination. "I'm going to take another shower," he announced. He gave the policeman a stern look. "Can I trust you to go have a word with Mr. Akeley while I go clean up?" "Certainly, sir," the officer said, skepticism audible in his voice. "I'll go speak with him now." Philip showered and dressed. When he returned to the kitchen, Veronica was seated at the small table, eyes fixed forward, staring towards the microwave. Her hands and wrists were stained with dirt and grass, as if she'd been digging in the yard, and there were traces of slime on her feet and wrists, but Philip didn't notice any of this at first. He looked through the window over the sink and saw that the police car was still parked in the driveway, blocking his car in. Philip cursed. "Honey, is that cop still over at Akeley's?" he asked. "I went with him," Veronica said. "And that idiot cop just stayed there?" Philip said as he poured himself another cup of coffee, his third this morning. Now I have to go over there if I'm going to get the damn cop to move his damn cop car. He looked at his wife for the first time in his third shower. He saw the stains on her hands. "What happened, honey? Did you fall down?" he asked. "Down," she replied in a croaking whisper. "Down with the fungi from Yugoth." A sliver of clear liquid ran from the corner of her mouth to her chin. Philip stared at her. Veronica had never been a morning person, but she'd seemed to waken up before his shower. He looked at his watch. Whatever was bugging her would have to wait. "You've got something on your chin," he said, and stepped through the kitchen door into the driveway. Philip walked straight to the front door of the old Akeley place. The high towers and gray walls loomed up, throwing deep shadows across the front yard. The grass was all but dead. Philip hated this house and what it did to his own property values. He pounded on the door. What answered the door wasn't human. At first, Philip couldn't comprehend the thing, an almost human mass of translucent liquid speckled with swimming motes that flashed like startled fish. The thing had a mouth, an obscene ring of crude flesh lined with serrated rows of hard tissue that might have been teeth. The thing was wearing a Miskatonic Valley police officer uniform. It reached out for Philip in a gesture of unendurable agony, a thing drowning in its own corrupted flesh. Philip ran. Too overwhelmed by horror to even scream, half mad with fear, he ran, forcing himself through the gap in the hedge where whatever slime-drenched horror had passed the night before, ruining another suit on this most terrible of all mornings. He charged through the kitchen door. Veronica was still seated at the table. "Honey," he shouted, "we have to go right now." He shook his wife. Her arms compressed beneath his fingers easily, as if the sleeves of her robe were filled with jellyfish instead of meat and bone. As Philip watched, Veronica's head began to slowly crumple inward, sinking into itself like a startled souffle. In the moment before he slipped into madness, Philip heard the thing speak. "Mr. Akeley wants to welcome you to the neighborhood," it said, a thick, clear liquid running from the formless tear that was once his wife's pretty mouth. "He hopes you can stay forever." I have a lot of fun with Philip and Veronica. There's two other stories about Azazoth Road and One Day in Hell. And I think they survived one of them. But all right, and this one's not in either of the books I have there, but I wanted to stick with the lifeboat theme. Any Hunter S. Thompson fans here? No? Okay, good. We've got a couple. Okay, so I wrote this when Dr. Thompson ended his life in 2005. It's a little bit of fan fiction, I guess. If you've seen the film Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas or read the book, this will all make sense. If not, it might still make sense. When the ship first began to roll over, my attorney and I were too addlepated from our regime of highly illegal narcotics to even conceive the idea of sinking or lifeboat. Make no mistake, our sense of self-preservation was as highly tuned as ever, and by the time our craft, the once lovely 70-foot wooden schooner turned floating ballroom and low-rent tourist trap christened the Rusty Nail, was bubbling its last, my attorney and I had already secured the most indispensable items from our stateroom and were busy cobbling together a serviceable raft from the detritus of the sinking ship. "This is bad," my attorney said as we watched the electric lights of the doomed ship flutter beneath the rolling water of the Pacific Ocean. "I may not be able to get you off this time. There's little doubt we sank that boat." "Impossible," I said as I secured another buoyant article to our haphazard raft. "That death trap failed every conceivable safety check known to civilized man. Modern vessels use technology derived from oil tankers and feature multiple self-repairing hulls. A few rounds from a .357 Magnum Python fired through the floor of a ship boasting up-to-date safeguards wouldn't allow enough water in to fill the ice buckets, never mind sink it with all hands and all but 2 passengers. We just performed a valuable service for the owners. Who knows what kind of lawsuits they would have faced had this tub gone under in more survivable circumstances." It was true. Few of the passengers were in any condition to file for damages. Several of them, already expired, are now serving as flotation devices for the raft my attorney and I were currently using as a barrier between ourselves and the sharks, moray eels, and barracuda that always formed the shipwreck. I lashed another bilious, bloated American tourist to the raft. These poor bastards were so filled with gas from the regular feedings at the round-the-clock buffets that they would keep my 300-pound Samoan attorney and I, and our suitcase full of essentials, afloat for days. It all depended on the sharks, of course. I had no illusions. 2 or more days adrift out here in the South Pacific beneath the blazing sun, no food, no water, and would see the sharks as less a threat to our limbs and more as competition for our only food supplies. I knew I would soon be faced with another of life's imponderables. The kind of question that separates true survivors from the blubbering, shattered remains of men. Could I tear a hunk of flesh from a 2-day dead dentist and choke it down? The raft lurched. I dropped the end of my leather belt that I was using as a fastener, picked up the Magnum, thinking the sharks had begun to make serious inroads into destroying our collection of deck chairs, life preservers, and drowning victims, when I realized that the shutter was just from my enormous turn shifting his position. "Land ho!" he called, and I turned my face towards the setting sun and saw the black shadows of palm trees silhouetted against the violent red sky. As your attorney, I strongly recommend that you begin rowing towards that island. Days pass. We make our camp on the beach, a shelter of dead palm fronds and faded Hawaiian print shirts stripped from the buoys of our raft. At first, we feast on seabirds and scavenger fish that swarm over the beached raft. My attorney scoops up crabs by the handful and we boil them in salt water and tequila. There's no drinking water. The booze is dehydrating us at an exponential rate. The days have been long. The amyl nitrate makes them seem longer. You should be able to get us out of here, I tell my attorney. You're Samoan. Your people populated these islands once, traveled on canoes gnawed from 200-foot-tall syads, dribbling your DNA all over these islands like fat, dark-skinned sperm shot from these circumcised palm trees. My attorney doesn't reply, just sits there, motionless, staring off across the water. I realize he hasn't moved for some time. Was he dead? Or had the drugs, booze, and dehydration driven him into a trance state similar to what the tribal witch doctors of Samoa used to experience? The old god Tagaloa, it is said among my attorney's people, fashioned men and women from 2 grubs he had found in the rotted conluvius of the primitive earth. Was my attorney even now in the court of that great old deity, standing before a throne of coconuts and skulls, making his case that we had come far enough from grubs to be worthy of rescue? Yesterday, I'd watched the ship crawl across the horizon, an enormous Pacific Princess cruise liner, crammed to the gunnels with Americans, white and swollen like larvae, out here to escape rumors of bombs and murder on their behalf in the Middle East, on vacation from supporting the troops, getting their smiles in the shape, so when the latest generation set across the sea on a bridge of waving flags to inject our culture like poison via the tips of bullets and bayonets came home, they will be welcomed, for that is what not having another Vietnam means. Wars are to be won, and the invaders who were once our children will be cheered, not despised. We have rediscovered the old trick of conquering without shame. I've been through the booze and drugs. All that's left is the Magnum, the third thing I'd saved when I felt the world lurch beneath my feet, when our stateroom was filling with salt water and small silvery fish. The dehydration and the heat stroke has simmered the bile off my perception. It's all clear to me now. I'm not here to be rescued. I have already been rescued. A gull perches on my attorney's dark forehead, a lean, white, feathered, hungry thing, uncertain on its yellow-webbed feet, a being wholly without remorse or reservations. It would unhesitatingly pluck the eye out of living man to live the next hour in greater ease than the hour before. I raised the Magnum, and I put an end to it.